All right. Welcome back, everybody. If you're new to the room, you have selected the best room for CIS. Congratulations, you're a winner. I want to welcome a friend of mine up to the stage, Lance Peterman, who is part of the Merck Identity Program, has been part of the identity community for a long time now, is one of the most knowledgeable and soft-spoken guys about how this all works. So if you don't get your questions in today with Lance, don't let him off these chairs tomorrow, because he's probably been through what you're about to go through, and he's seen this from large-scale multinational from the inside, and it's really fascinating. And special bonus, for those of you who are on Twitter, you may have seen a hashtag called Track Battle. So Nishant Kaushik and Laura Hunter from Microsoft, we've had this rivalry going for a couple of years now where people's pictures show up in photoshopped events. So if you were on Twitter, it would be good if you made a lot of noise during Lance's talk for some very specific moments. Trust me, you will know them when you see them. With that, Lance, come on, let's do this.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, and I appreciate the setup on the Photoshop thing. It'll deliver a lot better context than what I probably was going to deliver. So very briefly, Ian's already kind of introduced me. In addition to my work at Merck, I'm also an adjunct faculty at UNC Charlotte teaching software architecture and design. The biggest point behind this slide is that while I am speaking regarding Merck's identity programs, my opinions expressed here are those of my own and my own only. So, and you can reach out to me on Twitter. So users and horses. When I had the privilege of speaking here at CIS a year ago, I introduced a story regarding one of my horses that had a great relevance to the topic, separate from this one. And it was really well received. But in fairness, I kind of thought this is going to be a bit of a one-off. However, when I started thinking about customer identity management, and while I was working with my horses, I had a bit of an epiphany. And so you're going to get a little bit of an insight into the horse world. Some of you will like it, some of you may not, but hopefully you'll find them interesting regardless. Now, this is not my farm, but these are my horses. And the guys, to kind of give you a background into horses, horses have a lot of similarity to humans. And what I mean by that is they learn differently. And a lot of people would think, well, what do you mean? The horses are horses, right? Well, just like humans, some of you may be tactile learners, some of you may be visual learners, and some of you may be auditory learners. Well, horses have different learning styles as well. So instead of calling them learning personalities, we call them horsenalities. Insert pun here. So what I'm going to walk you through here is how these horses differ in its relationship to customer identity management. Now, if you take this fellow on the left, this is my wife's gelding, Tucker. And Tucker is an interesting challenge anytime I choose to play with him, because being somewhat introverted, one of his key elements of his learning style is you have to be very engaging with him. And you also have to be very energetic and provocative. And when you talk to me in a conversation, hopefully I'm a little provocative, but I'm just not naturally as provocative as my wife is. So when I'm playing with him, if I'm not achieving that same level of engagement and energy, I wind up with this scenario. And it doesn't show up very well, but you can see he's expressing his opinion as to what I would like to say, and my wife is laughing accordingly. So when we don't achieve that, you get the horse's opinion rather quickly, and that's the wonderful thing about horses is their level of honesty exceeds anything a human will deliver. Now this is my horse, Freckles. And in this scenario, you can't really see all of the story of what's going on, but what I'm asking her to do is step onto that blue tarp. Now I'm doing so, there's no ropes attached to her in any way whatsoever, so the truth is there. I'm either being effective or I'm not. And as you'll see in this scenario with the angle that she's approaching, I'm not being effective, because actually what happens, and you can't see it in the background, there's about 30 people in the fences behind me watching this pseudo competition that's going on, and my horse walks over to them and says, so, how do you think he's doing? The good news was I recovered, and I was able to reestablish communication with my customer, her, who always tells me what she's thinking, and eventually I got to this. And you can even see from the look on our face, there's a level of engagement. And this is what we're trying to obtain when we work with our customers. And I'm going to use customers in a slightly different context than what Ian did, because I'm going to try and expand the definition a little bit. But that's what you're looking for. Now, if you don't get this, sometimes you can get some extreme reactions, and you wind up with this. Now, in this scenario, neither of these guys are getting what they want. Tucker wants to play. Pony, and yes, her name is Pony, does not. So you can argue maybe Tucker is kind of getting what he wants because he's at least getting engagement, but in reality, they're not. So that's the scenario that you get when you have that kind of disconnect. And ultimately, what you're looking for is that type of delight that Ian talked about. And when you achieve that, you get something kind of cool. Again, no ropes. Now, to be fair, I have to give credit to my wife. She created this, I didn't. And I don't mean the picture, I mean she created that experience for them. But that's what's possible when we engage our customers at a level that creates that delight, that reduces that friction. And I think we can do that. However, there are severe consequences when you do not get that. And that's when this can happen. Now, as you'll see, this horse is not happy. Now, of course, I'm quite happy. But the gentleman that's on the receiving end of this transaction is very much not happy. Now, if you don't happen to notice who I'm referring to, let me zoom it in a little bit. But as you can tell, what happens in this scenario is, now I don't know the full context behind this because this isn't my horse, but I can tell you two things. Number one, this poor guy asked the wrong thing of the horse or asked it with too much pressure or too much energy, or the horse just simply said, I'd rather not. Now, rather not might be a loose term for it. So we can get those same outcomes with users when we don't deliver the experience that we're capable of. We can wind up with disengagement, where the users close the window, or they close the app. God forbid they even delete the app. You could lose a relationship or the business. Maybe you have a partner that you've been working with for years. I work in the life sciences field, and sometimes we lose partnerships because of the kind of identity experience that we've delivered. Or you could have an even worse scenario where, because they're contractually bound to do business with you, they're compliant, but they're not really happy. So they wind up performing poorly. Now, I'm not going to say identity is the sole reason for this. But the fact that we treat the users all the same between employees, partners, vendors, and customers, that's when we fail. And unfortunately, up until recently, a lot of our identity tools were the same. You would get this shiny new hammer to start tackling identity problems. And we loved it. So every requirement that we looked at was a nail. And we treated it the same way because we had the same tool. Well, the good news is the tool set has changed a little bit. So I would offer that it's time to put the hammer down. Now, unfortunately, this has a little bit of duct tape on it because we had some trouble getting it through TSA. You guys probably know why. But I am going to put this hammer down, but it's still an important identity hammer. So in doing so, I would very much like to hand it to someone I can trust. So Ian, if you wouldn't mind, I would like to hand this to you. Need some lightning coming down. And of course, I'm handing it to him for a very specific reason. And that was our venture into the Marvel Comics universe. So when we're looking at customer identity from a Merck context, and this is what I'm trying to share, we're first going to start and talk about platforms, because this kind of informs where our journey goes. Then we'll look at some specific partner stories, one focusing on collaboration, looking at a product that we have called Engage Zone, and how we're transitioning into our clinical landscape. And then we'll look at the more traditional customer identity management landscape with both our core customers and our healthcare professionals. And then finally, I'll share what we've learned and a little bit about where we're headed. But first, we're going to talk about platforms. And I think Pam might like these, but I don't, these weren't the platforms I was thinking of. Traditionally, and Ian kind of touched on this, enterprise IAM, we've gained a level of maturity at it. And when we talk with our peers in the industry, Merck has some maturity both in the enterprise space and actually in the customer space. We've been doing this for a little while in terms of making sure that our customers are aware of the products that we have out in the market. Why do we do that? Because we want to make sure they're able to access them in the various markets that we have. Other aspects of IT, however, varied in that sense. Not that they weren't delivering those services, but they didn't view them in the platform architecture model that we were. So as a result, there was a little bit of a disconnect in the language between the two, even though we were speaking English. So a few years ago, our CIO decided that we were going to convert to a platform-only strategy for all of our IT services, including IAM. This was a huge opportunity for us because it allowed us to shift and start talking to the individual platforms, and like Ian touched on, to be able to communicate to them that everything you're doing, every transaction that you're performing has identity at the core of it. And when we can get them to realize that, we get engagement at the beginning of the game instead of in the ninth inning of the game. The joke I like to use is, I don't want IAM to be the closer of a project. I may not necessarily want him being the starting pitcher, but I'd like him to at least be on third base. And the other piece that I think is really useful is, as part of this platform strategy, we're making APIs central to these platforms. So shifting our focus on APIs as well is going to be a huge accelerator of change for us. So now let's talk about partner stories. And in doing so, I want to give you a little insight into kind of how Merck has transitioned over the past couple of years. Old World Pharma did their research very much in kind of the ivory tower mentality. We would do our core research, we would develop a product, we would test it, FDA would approve it, and we'd push it out to market. That world changed several years ago, where we realized very quickly that for us to be profitable as a corporation long term, collaboration had to be central to what we were doing in order to develop more products, to make them more effective, to get them better tested, and get that collaboration experience really working for us. So in today's life sciences, research collaboration is now the norm as opposed to the exception. And a good example of this, hopefully you guys can read this, is our work with MD Anderson Hospital. And one of the products that Merck got FDA approval last year that I'm really excited about is a product called Keytruda. And it's the only product, it's not even a pitch, I'm just sharing. Keytruda is really exciting because it's an immuno-oncology drug. In other words, it works against cancer using the body's immune system against it, which has always been a challenge when it comes to treating cancer. In the past, your only alternatives were really these broad spectrum treatments of either chemotherapy or radiation. Well, what we did in the case of malignant melanoma was we were able to discover a compound that would actually turn off cancer's ability to hide itself from our immune system. And now that it was out in the open and our immune system would go, hey, you're not allowed here, it would start attacking those tumor cells. And we've had a huge success rate with this. Some of you, if you've been watching the news, President Jimmy Carter came down with malignant melanoma and was in the end stage of the disease, and his life expectancy was not great. And he went through a round with Keytruda, and now his life expectancy is looking far better, especially for a man of his advanced age. And so the collaboration that we're doing with MD Anderson is really exciting because we're not just looking at malignant melanoma, we're looking at all cancer types and trying to see if that type of immune approach might work for other cancers. So I think that's pretty cool. It's one moment I get to brag on my company. The next element that I think is equally exciting is that of Engage Zone. And Engage Zone is a collaborative relationship that we have with XOSTAR. I think we have at least one employee from XOSTAR in the audience. That is really exciting for me because what it's done is it's recalibrated how we decide to collaborate with the rest of the world. In the past, the old identity paradigm was, if you want to do work with Merck, we're going to issue you a Merck identity. And you may go away and go do some work with AstraZeneca, and they're going to issue you an AZ identity. And then rinse and repeat. And then you may come back to Merck, but because you've been gone long enough, we're going to issue you another Merck identity. Rinse and repeat. You guys know this cycle. What we decided to do instead was say, you know what, we really kind of want to get out of the identity management business. So what we did was we partnered with XOSTAR, who already had a success pattern of this in the aerospace and defense sector, where instead of issuing a Merck identity, they're going to issue what's called a SAM identity, which you can see, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner here, which is a Safe Biopharma certified identity. What does that mean? Well, it means that when we hand these to certain individuals, you can now do digital signatures with these identities. That's an important step forward. It's not a huge demand item, but I think long-term it's going to be extremely valuable. But what it also allows us to do is for any partner that comes in, instead of issuing them a Merck identity and having a lifecycle management that we still have to manage surrounding that, we can now extend that. And so you wind up with Engage Zone, which is a SharePoint-based collaboration community. And then where the real money comes into this in terms of value and that delightful experience is we can extend it to other applications. So you have some of these cloud applications down here at the bottom, you have other SaaS-based applications down here, and future application and portals here, where because we have this ecosystem framework that we're getting partners joining, literally by the month. Right now, some key ones that just joined, Amgen just joined. And the idea is that when someone partners with XOSTAR or with Merck, and they receive this XOSTAR identity, when they do work with a Pfizer or an Amgen or an AstraZeneca, they're not getting a new identity every time. They can carry that forward for each of those relationships. And we feel like that's a really exciting development. I'm going to talk briefly about vendor engagement, and this is kind of a description of our current state. We are actually changing this, but because we're just about to launch, I was not given approval to talk about this exciting new product. But I do want to talk about where we're at, and I can talk a little bit in terms of the gaps, and you'll get a hint of where we're headed. Now, our vendor engagement, we treat vendors as customers as well. Why do we do that? Because they don't necessarily have to do business with us. Now, they obviously have a higher incentive than customers do, because there's a profit motive involved. But at the end of the day, they have a choice as to who they do business with. And if that identity relationship isn't there, if we create so much friction surrounding that in terms of the multiple identities, lack of single sign-on, a bad UX, they could eventually say, you know what, when contract renewal comes around, we're just not really ready to do business with you again. That really hurts us, particularly in the clinical space, which I'll talk to in a moment. But the features of this particular segment, it is a mature process. It scales well. It integrates with our ERP system. It includes enhanced access to our supply chain. And it does have some basic lifecycle management capabilities. Where we have gaps is I really think this is going to be a good opportunity to get integrated with our Success and Engage Zone. As Ian kind of alluded to, legacy apps are still a major thorn in our side. And I suspect if I asked for a show of hands, I'd see a lot of them where, especially older apps that don't even have federation capability, they really still hamper what we're doing. So we're trying to retire those applications over time. And as we add new products, I think that's where the opportunity to engage that's going to be. And one of our key needs in this space, because these are vendors and because we are a highly regulated environment, we need a much stronger access certification lifecycle. But now we start to talk about the more traditional customer IAM approach. And you'll see a lot of the same features here. So I'm not going to go into huge detail on the common stuff. But what we're doing here is fairly mature. You have the registration and the profile management, single sign-on to other Merck properties. So we've reduced that friction. And we've been doing this for probably about 8 years now. We have basic and advanced search by the healthcare professionals. And we have web analytics and reporting to help us understand where they're going. Where our gaps are today is because this landscape is changing, the single sign-on experience is highly fragile. So it is subject to break. And it's not just, oh, I need to log in again. It's which identity can I use to get access to this site, which is a high friction experience that nobody wants. International availability is a key challenge for us, especially when we start talking about privacy. And finally, the web experience or the mobile experience today is largely web-based, and that needs to shift to a mobile app, which we are doing. The engine underneath this, which plugs into the more traditional consumer-oriented identity and access management, is our e-profile system. And it has, again, the same familiar features. You'll see the registration and the consent and the opt-in, which we have to do because, again, it's one thing to just manage US privacy needs, but we're going into markets literally all over the world, and you have to identify each set of privacy concerns, and some are harder than others. We do have some customer validation and proofing, which is interesting. In particular, when our healthcare professionals will participate on some of our sites, we'll give them access to some medical research that the company that's providing this on our behalf, they require that only physicians can access this research. So we do have to go through a proofing mechanism to say, can you provide us your physician ID? And then we have a service to validate that. I think that's a good example of where, what Ian described, we can kind of move beyond that and get into attribute validation, there will be a much stronger experience for the user and hopefully long-term reducing the friction. However, we do have some considerable gaps in this. The deployments aren't efficient or scalable, particularly going across countries. Because we go through mergers and acquisitions as well, we have a fragmented set of profile repositories. Right now we're sitting at about 5, which is actually better than it has been. We have multiple credential stores. SSO is fragile here as well. We have limited login alternatives, and what I mean by that is social sign-in really isn't available to us just yet. It is starting to be. And the APIs are dated. They're all XML based. And obviously, the world is moving to a more RESTful approach. So with that in mind, I'll kind of tell you what we've learned. And thankfully, days before the conference, our friends at Unbound ID delivered a survey specific to this topic. And as you've sensed through the theme of this talk, one of the big challenges that we have is the gap between what IT and identity professionals think the customer wants and what the customer actually wants. And so they provided these survey results that crystallize that picture even better than I can. And the first numbers that you see here are the survey responses that are associated with what IT either thinks what the users want or what they need. And that doesn't make them necessarily wrong, because for compliance reasons, we have to have this, whereas the users aren't always going to tell you, you know what, I would really like a more secure experience when I'm on this website. You're never going to hear that, right? But the bottom line is we need that. So you see at the top here, you have identity proofing, MFA, which of course you want for a better security experience. But you'll notice that data privacy and some of the other opt-in and management pieces kind of go down by the wayside. When you look at the customers, however, and I promise these slides will be available, customers seem to disagree. What do they want? They want control. They want management of the registration, opt-in and opt-out management, data privacy, a good password reset experience. And then one of the things I did like to see in here, and I hope this isn't an outlier, there's a decent percentage of them that do want MFA. Now, I haven't looked at the survey results. I don't know, and this is not in any way challenging what Unbound ID has delivered. That's pretty promising if that's true, because I think everybody in here would agree most customers aren't coming to me saying, when am I going to get two-factor authentication for my account? That's just not happening. So what we've learned, now I'm no analyst, but business needs will vary even internally. There's key differences between what our animal health business wants and our global human health business wants. So we have to calibrate based on those needs. The clear message is the user experience is what matters. Obviously, that's going to be one of the themes in this track. The users want control. They want control over how their data is used. They want control of their experience. And they want control over their communications. How often are you going to communicate with me? What topics are you going to communicate with me about? And then obviously, privacy is critical to all of this. So where are we headed? We're managing 3 platforms effectively, not just a single platform. So you have the traditional enterprise, which is the employee and contractor identity platform. You have the vendor partner collaboration platform, and then you have the customer platform. Our customer convergence is going to be on a single IAM platform instead of the multiple ones that we have today. Requirements are still the driver for all of those, not the tools. APIs, you can repeat that 3 times and hope that something good happens. You have to balance privacy, security, and that experience, and we know identity is intrinsic to that. Get feedback from all of your sectors. Don't treat those customers as all as one. Even if they're all in the customer space, their needs are going to vary, and so your spectrum is going to kind of go this way depending upon the needle. And then finally, a note on advertising. As Ian was talking about, we've gained a lot of maturity in identity when it comes to our enterprise. But even in that area, we've had some failings, at least at Merck, in terms of how we advertise those experiences and the availability of those services. And this is not a unique issue for IT or for IAM. IT in general is not very good at this, and this is not unique to Merck. So I feel like this is an opportunity for us to advertise these capabilities, especially with respect to the API transformation. We can engage the developers, give them documentation that makes sense, that makes it easy to consume these things. We still manage how they use them, because obviously we are talking about identity, but that helps us understand who's using our services, how are they using it, and then we can also solicit feedback on where do we take those services in the future. And I think all of those will deliver that experience that will not only delight our customers, might delight our vendors, our partners, and maybe even our employees and contractors too. And finally, I would like to say there were no horses harmed in the making of this presentation. Thank you very much. So I'd like to, we have a little bit of time. Love to take questions from the audience. Question, we can follow up tomorrow too if we don't have time. I'm not going to identify you. I'm not going to guarantee I won't identify you.
I was just wondering with the XOSTAR integration. Mic swap. There you go. Thank you.
We have a mic swap.
Okay. With the XOSTAR integration that you have for people like the hospital that you're partnering with, are they actually creating an XOSTAR ID and that's what you're federating with, or are they able to actually federate their IDP to XOSTAR, and XOSTAR is acting more like a clearinghouse to connect for you to federate to XOSTAR, and then these other entities can federate into them?
The answer to that is both. For the smaller organizations or individuals that choose to collaborate with us, we'll issue them that XOSTAR identity. But for some of the larger organizations in which we're able to do an assessment of what their information security practices are, how they protect their data, how they protect their identities, then they can come in as what we call a federated partner in that ecosystem. Some examples of that are like ParExcel and a couple of others that, and Merck is an example of that, where I don't know my XOSTAR identity. I technically have one, but all of my interactions with that community is using my Merck identity.
Is that what that safe certified IDP was?
For the customer identities, yes. Or not customer, the partner identities, yes. We're going through a process today of trying to get our Merck identities safe certified as well, but that's separate from that initiative.
Maybe quickly one more. Bud? All right.
Hi, Lance. Question, you have a very good point about requirements-driven versus tools. What is your process of gathering requirements? Who are you talking to?
Great question. As the architecture and design professor, that's a subject I love to talk about. The short answer is you got to talk to your customers. And you also have to talk to your line of business, because they're going to have that engagement with the customers that's going to be much stronger and much sharper than if I go knocking on their door saying, hi, what do you think about identity? Usually they're going to do it as part of a broader conversation, and they're going to be asking questions around how would you like the experience to be, and that's how we drive those requirements up to the identity layer.
All right, thank you, everyone. Come back after the break. Patrick and Jay have an amazing story you guys need to hear, but otherwise, we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thanks.